And the focus of today's second webinar of this amazing series of legacy of Mary Magdalene, her past, her future, and what's happening today, especially with all the discoveries in Egypt and Turkey and Greece of these authentically texts written around the 1st and 2nd century. And all these texts have been reviewed and studied in depth by scholars from Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Princeton universities. And now it's becoming really very powerful that actually Mary Magdalene has a stand in where we are. Our current Pope, 2016, has declared her as one of the most important apostles. And today, our two scholars, Teresa Egaña and Ellie Ingraham, both passionate about women's history, especially the one that has been rarely told, as you can hear, and women archetype, have been researching and lecturing on the topic of Mary Magdalene for decades, but also are very passionate about understanding and sharing Mary Magdalene's leadership style. So Tere Egaña is a founder and CEO of Mujer Wow. She's an international speaker and mentor of Mary Magdalene and women leaderships. She's a psychologist, non-conflict coach, and she's also a master trainer in international certification of gender parity in the caring economy seminars by Women for Solutions, and coach of a non-conflict business, entrepreneurship incubator of Bootcamp Women Wow. And Ellie Ingraham is CEO of Center for Partnership Systems, founded by Riane Eisler. As you saw in the video that we showed at the beginning, Riane Eisler is in our hearts, and she is the one who created the concept of the caring economy as we take it forward. And the Center for Partnership Systems is an accelerator to shift to an economic or socioeconomic more based on the caring economy as we are. Ellie was formerly the CEO of Sage Family Foundation, and previously she was the TIE Global Artisans and Chief Network Officer at YPO. What most people do not know about Ellie is that she is an ordained minister and in her earlier life and studied sacred text and literature for over 2 decades. So we are very honored that both Tere and Ellie are Women for Solution board members and have contributed a great deal in our vision and philosophy. So please, ladies, share today about our second webinar on Mary Magdalene's gospel, the one she apparently wrote, and her life and impact on Egypt and southern France. It's all on you, great ladies.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, everybody, for joining for round 2 of Mary Magdalene, her life, ministry, and journey. I'm going to provide a lot of context, and then Tere will take you forward on her leadership journey. So I'm going to take you back to December 1945, when Muhammad Ali Salman was out looking for fertilizer and firewood in the Nag Hammadi region of Upper Egypt. Well, he didn't find either of those things, but what he did find were a series of jars with ancient scrolls in them dating back to the 2nd century. And these were writings about what had happened in the 1st century. These were scrolls that were unknown at the time and to our day as Christian Gnostic texts, and that they were written shortly after Jesus' death. So the Gnostics, which came out of the Essenes in Judea, emerged as a Jewish Christian sect in the 1st century. And what they thought and believed that was somewhat different was that there was a divine spark in humans. And they championed that salvation came via a personal spiritual enlightenment, not necessarily via belief in a Messiah. And so they championed the inner spiritual path with a direct relationship to God, not necessarily based on a church or a church bureaucracy. So they were very different at the time. They also viewed women as equal teachers and leaders based on their spiritual qualifications. Again, something that was really uncommon back then. And it bears mentioning that Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and John the Baptizer were all Essenes, and the Essenes were the ones who informed the Gnostic sect and writings. You also want to remember that the early Christian movement was really fluid. It was anything but locked down and defined. Some people viewed Jesus as fulfilling the messianic prophecy of the Old Testament, and some did not. Some just viewed him as a spiritually enlightened human being. There were no doctrines, there was certainly no Trinity, and there was absolutely no accepted Bible canon. All the teachings and the writings of the time were actually interspersed with a lot of philosophy as well, because Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were kind of around. And so they infused in the Christian dialogue, as well as language and references from both pagan and polytheistic communities. So it was very much a dynamic amalgamation of thought. Christianity as we know it today actually emerged 300 years after Christ died. Jesus died in around 33 CE. It's generally accepted. So in the first third of the first century. And after he died, the disciples all dispersed. They went up into Europe, they went into India, they went into Africa, they even got as far as China. So you can imagine how those early Christian teachings really probably morphed and evolved as they interacted in these new areas of the world. So Jesus dies in 33 CE, and about 300 years later, in the year 325 CE, Constantine is the emperor of the Roman Empire, and he wants to unite the empire, and he knows that one of the biggest problems are all the religious factions. So he gets this idea of convening the bishops from all the lands, and so he kind of conspires with the Pope to pull together what was called the Council of Nicaea. And he wanted them to basically get on the same page because he felt it would unite the kingdom. It was a political strategy that he had in mind. Well, at the time, there were two main factions: the Trinitarians that really believed in the co-equal, co-powerful, co-eternal existence of God, the Spirit, and the Christ. And the other faction was the Arians, who did not believe that God and Christ and the Holy Spirit were one and the same. They viewed them as very separate things. Well, lo and behold, because the Pope was really of a Trinitarian inclination, the Trinitarians won out. And that meant that the Arians were really anathemized. They were literally cursed, condemned. Their books were burned. Their teachings were just scrubbed from all the teachings of the time. What was interesting is the Council of Nicaea released the Nicene Creed, upon which the Trinity doctrine got based. It has nothing to do with Scripture. It was a completely separate document. But what I find interesting is that Constantine, the politician, released what was called the Edict of Milan, which said that there would be religious tolerance throughout his kingdom and that anybody could worship any deity in any way they wanted. So you really see that it was the spiritual leaders at the time who were really pushing an agenda. And so back in the first century, it's really no wonder that the Gnostics hid their scrolls in these jars, because they were being persecuted as heretics by the religious leaders of their time, who were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And those Gnostic texts were never made known, never shared, because they did not align with the Trinitarian Christianity that sort of was handed down through the ages. The Gnostics were considered to undermine church hierarchy because they really didn't believe in its bureaucracy, and because they favored personal understanding and spiritual enlightenment. So what's fascinating, when these Gnostic Gospels were found, it allowed us to strip off the 300 years of Christianity that had evolved and actually go back to the first century teachings of Jesus and his small group of followers. It allows us to see what Christianity looked like before the patriarchy got a hold of it. So among those Gospels that were found were the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. There was also the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip. And what's wonderful to see in these Gospels is that 3 Marys are mentioned over and over again: Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary, Jesus' sister, and Mary Magdalene, Jesus' beloved companion. And so the Gospel of Mary, you may recall in the teaser we left in our first webinar, there are a total of 3 manuscripts that have ever been discovered about the Gospel of Mary that were written in the 2nd century. All of them were missing the same 8 pages. It was like somebody literally cut them out of every existing manuscript because they did not want the contents to be known. So this was a great mystery, but it turns out there was one other intact manuscript that survived. It was a Greek manuscript dating back to the 1st century. So the other ones were a century later. This one predated them by, let's say, around 100 years. Now, when you think that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the ones we are most familiar with, they were written 2 generations after this Gospel of the beloved companion, the one that was intact. It is now thought by scholars that this original manuscript is the one upon which the other 4 Gospels is based. Truly, truly astonishing. Further evidence is that if you look at the book of John, the Gospel of John, it is actually a redacted version of the Gospel of the beloved companion. If you do a side-by-side comparison, it is astonishing. It is like John literally replaced she pronouns with he, changed the feminine Holy Spirit to the male God the Father. He conformed the language so that it looked more like the Peter and Paul teachings. Those are the ones that informed the church ultimately. And most importantly, changed the reference of the beloved companion to be the beloved disciple, which confounded scholars for years. They could not figure out who the beloved disciple was, and they ended up thinking it was John. In fact, the original reference is to the beloved companion, who was Mary Magdalene. And you may recall in your own encounters around the Last Supper, the visuals and even the stories, it depicts John sitting next to Jesus with his head on his breast, and it's supposed to be one of the most touching vignettes in the Bible, just of the close relationship. In fact, there are ancient churches in France with frescoes that actually depict the Last Supper with a woman sitting next to Jesus, which would make sense because in the original manuscript, it talks about how the beloved companion sat next to him with her head upon his chest. So even Da Vinci, in his work, depicts a woman next to Jesus in the Last Supper. So it's so fascinating. So it's not surprising that it's churches in France that have these frescoes, because the manuscript traveled there from Alexandria, Egypt, and that is exactly the path of Mary Magdalene. After Jesus' death, she went to Alexandria and then went to France in 44 CE, to southern France, which at the time was still part of Roman Gaul, or the Roman Empire. And she arrived in what is now modern day Languedoc. It's just the name of the French community there. And she is thought to have lived the rest of her days there, to have died in around 70 CE. And to this day, there is a very, very vibrant community there that celebrates her. And that's what Tere is probably going to talk a little bit about. And Tere knows tons fascinating things about that. So The manuscript was secreted away to southern France, and the Essenes quietly kept it alive. And remember, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and John the Baptizer were all Essenes, and it had to be kept hidden. And there was a vow of silence in the community because the Vatican wanted to destroy it. And this was when all the Crusades were coming. And in fact, in the year 1209, the Albigensian Crusade was dispatched to Languedoc, and the Roman Church killed 1 million of the people in that community. 1 million people there died. It almost wiped them out. Well, in the 12th century, this manuscript was translated from Greek into French so that more of the people there could know about it, but it was still under this vow of silence in the community because they did not want it to be exposed and destroyed. And in fact, back in the 12th century, I've recently learned that it was the Knights Templar who were actually engaged to help protect it. And it was the Knights Templar who helped finance the building of this community and its sort of reverent edifices to celebrate Mary Magdalene. In fact, some scholars think this manuscript, this one manuscript, is in fact the Holy Grail that people were talking about because it needed to be so highly protected. Well, you got to wonder why it needed to be so protected. So in 2020, that's like yesterday, this Greek manuscript was finally translated into English by a descendant of the original Languedoc community. Her name is Jehanne de Quillon, and she wrote a book called The Gospel of the Beloved Companion, and it's just an English rendition of the original Greek. So it is fascinating. So before we get to those missing pages, I want to just talk a little bit about what this gospel actually shows us. First of all, when you read it, and I hope you do, it is clearly the irrefutable voice of a woman who is an intimate companion or associate of Jesus. Won't get into the nature of the intimacy, but let me just share a few things. In chapter 6 of the gospel, it talks about that first miracle of Jesus, and you may be familiar with it, where he turns the water into wine at a wedding. Well, in chapter 6 of the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, Mary says it was at their wedding. This is fascinating, where Jesus' mother Mary goes up to him and says, hey, we're running out of wine. Could you make some? And it's his wedding feast. In chapter 22, it talks about how Jesus returned home to Bethany, to the house of his beloved companion. And in chapter 32, Mary Magdalene anoints Jesus on the head with a very, very precious oil. And that is something in that time period only a wife could do. So I'll leave it up to you to make your own conclusions when you read about it, but it is truly fascinating. But in terms of more philosophically and spiritually what it shows us, it actually shows teachings of Jesus that are pretty different from the Christianity that we know today, particularly how he elevates women, respects women, and the divine feminine is just really beautiful to see. It talks about how Mary Magdalene accompanied him throughout his ministry. And in fact, because she was a wealthy woman, she financed his ministry. And after she anoints him with oil before the Last Supper, the last Passover meal, at that time, Jesus does something really incredible. He announces to all of the gathered apostles, he says, I am now declaring Mary the Magdala. Mary the Magdala. You can see where it kind of got changed to Mary Magdalene, which is a geographic region in Judea, but Jesus called her the Magdala, which when translated means tower of my flock. He was appointing Mary Magdalene as the head of his mission, basically. He further went on to say that it would be only Mary Magdalene who did not abandon him. He said only Mary Magdalene actually got the full import of all his teachings. At this, you can imagine the male disciples were quite grumbled, and they did not like what they were hearing. Further, though, Mary Magdalene was in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus was arrested. And while the other disciples, including Peter, fled because they were scared, Mary Magdalene stood her ground and stayed with him. She stood with Jesus during his entire trial when Peter denied him 3 times. She stood at the crucifixion site with his mother, despite the danger of being there with a criminal. And she and his mother Mary witnessed his ultimate death. After his death, she alone was allowed into the tomb garden where he was put behind the rock to prepare him for burial. Now, this was a custom that was only allowed to a wife or a close family member. And most importantly, she was the first person to see him after he appeared, after his death. He chose to appear to her. Now, remember, all the disciples had fled because they were scared they too were going to be killed due to their association. So about a week after Jesus appeared, Mary says, you know what, we got to pull our act together. And she puts the word out and she convenes all the apostles in her home. And she literally is described as raising her right hand in an authoritative way. And she begins the meeting to discuss next steps. So she is clearly the de facto leader of Jesus' ongoing mission. Truly remarkable. And at this meeting, she describes a vision that Jesus shared with her. And it is this vision that is contained in the missing pages. And as someone who has read sacred texts, to come upon these missing pages was life-changing for me. I can almost feel the tears welling behind my eyes, because in the many years of study, certain things never made sense to me. The role of women never made sense to me. And that is why I left the ministry. I could not reconcile it. So to come across this, for me, was just a game changer. I got to tell you, it is an elaborate description of spiritual enlightenment. It is an elaborate description of the steps Jesus taught Mary and asked her to teach others on how you arrive to be a spiritual person. It's so, so beautiful. And the fact that it has been hidden and kept from everyone is just an atrocity. And so I want to read part of it to you right now, because there's nothing like the actual words. It describes this transformation as a great tree with 8 boughs. And basically 7 of the boughs are the different steps or challenges that we have to go through in order to reach the 8th bough of spiritual enlightenment. So if you will indulge me, I just want to read it to you. So chapter 43, verse 3. Then he showed me a vision in which I saw a great tree that seemed to reach unto the heavens. And as I saw these things, he said, the roots of this tree are in the earth, which is your body. The trunk extends upward through the 5 regions of humanity to the crown, which is the kingdom of the Spirit. And then just very briefly, I want to hit on those 7 boughs and then the 8th, where he says the first great bough that bears the fruit of love and compassion. You must free yourself of all judgment and wrath. That's the first challenge. The second great bough, weighed down with the fruit of wisdom and understanding, you must be free of all ignorance and tolerance. The third great bough, which bears the fruit of honor and humility, you must be free of all duplicity and arrogance. The fourth bough, blossoming with the fruit of strength and courage, you must free yourself from the weakness of the flesh and the illusion of your fears. The fifth bough, and the fruit of clarity and truth, where you know yourself for the first time. The sixth bough, the one that bore the fruit of power and healing, to heal your own soul and thereby make it ready to ascend. The seventh bough, filled by the fruits of light and goodness. And then the eighth and final bough, upon which burned the fruit of the grace and beauty of the Spirit. And then he says, Miriam or Mary, whom I have called the Magdala, now you have seen the all and have known the truth of yourself and the truth that is I am. It is just to me an astonishing set of words and kind of benediction to humanity. And at first, what was incredible is that everyone gathered around as she shared this were incredibly inspired by it. And then the male apostles got jealous and they started this exchange saying, did he really share that with you? Why would he tell you that as a woman? And why do you think he loved you more? Wait, he loved you more than us? And in fact, this bitter argument ensued, particularly led by Peter, who was so jealous. It got so bad that they actually made Mary cry. It's incredible. And so Peter left in a huff and they were never to see each other again. And so when you think about it, it is no wonder that his misogyny then got carried into the teachings he told that then got embedded into a patriarchal church. It is just, to me, just, it's right there. So ultimately, this beautiful story of Mary Magdalene and spiritual enlightenment, which is the essence of Jesus' teachings, was not only lost, it was corrupted, because the 7 challenges leading to the 8th level of enlightenment actually were turned into the 7 sins and the 7 demons that had to be expunged from Mary Magdalene the prostitute. They completely corrupted this story. So in other words, just as the religious leaders of the time tried to anathemize the Gnostics, the Arians, the Languedoc, they have tried to destroy the true story of Mary Magdalene and her astonishing leadership in the early Christian movement. And with that, I will hand it over to Tere.
But before Tere, I just want to mention to all of you is that at that time, women were stoned. Women were not, didn't have rights. Women had were just chattel of man. So it was such a revolution what Jesus was doing to give the power to a woman. And behold this, Dante Alighieri in his Divine Comedy and Mozart in the Magic Flute all mention about these 7 steps, but all in mystery. Tere, please, and thank you, Eli. This was such a moving presentation.
Extremely moving. I almost cried and I had to breathe very deep, so I didn't. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Laura. For those who doesn't know me, English is not my language, so I do a great effort to share everything I know in this language. So be patient with me. I shared in the chat some of the manuscripts that were found in Nag Hammadi. So you can have them there and copy them, have them with you. There were 150 documents or manuscripts, and those are the most important ones, especially the ones that are being translated. But I wrote in Instagram something about these manuscripts, and someone wrote to me back and said, you should go to the Bible because everything you're saying has no hard evidence. And I answered to this person, these Gospels and manuscripts were found in 1947 in Egypt, in Nag Hammadi. They had been hidden for centuries and centuries, originally hidden 3 centuries after Christ. They have never been changed. They have never been seen nor read by anyone else during all that time, which means that they are hard evidence of everything Eli has said. The other manuscripts and Gospels have been changed since the Old Testament, the Old Gospel, Old Testament, yes? Yeah, Old Testament by Ezra, the escrivan, the main escrivan of the Hebrew movement, to the New Testament after Constantine during 3 concils every 100 years, and then with the Inquisition, especially after the Pope Gregory the Magnus in the year 500, where he decided that Mary Magdalene had to be confused with a prostitute. So everything in the Bible that we can read has been changed, but these manuscripts are virgin, are original. They haven't been touched. So everything that Eli have shared, and I'm going to share, comes from that knowledge. I have my mother, she is a Catholic, and I was sharing with Laura and Eli that 2-3 days ago on Sunday, she asked to me, I was listening to you and reading everything you're writing down, and I have a question. And I said, what? And she said, why did church lie to us? And that question is the most important question that someone can ask her or himself. It doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Jewish or you're Muslim or Buddhist or whatever. The church has been a powerful organization in politics, in economy, in society, and especially in gender beliefs. And the church has been so powerful that the whole world, no matter what religion they believe or not, there is an before Christ and after Christ. That's the power of the church. It doesn't matter what religion you are, you measure time before and after Christ. This church certainly lied because of many reasons, but especially because of Mary Magdalene, because she was the one who was chosen to not create Christianity, but to build up a new revolutionary Judaism that understands God and women and community and everything totally different. Jesus and Mary Magdalene never wanted to create a new religion, and that we have to understand deeply. They never were after creating a new religion, but a revolutionary way of understanding God. This God became the main message of Mary Magdalene. When Eli was talking about this woman, this wife or counterpart in leadership with Jesus, walking along this guy who was being tortured and punished and destroyed in a very painful, awful way, she was there, step by step, loving him. Even though her mind must have said, are you crazy? Why didn't you run? Run! But he didn't run, he stayed. He wanted to set an idea, a revolutionary way of understanding God. And she stayed with him. In the cross, when he was there hanging, he asked Joseph of Arimathea to protect not only Mary Magdalene, but also his bloodline. She was pregnant. And this is known in what we call now South France and many other myths and stories along history. So Joseph of Arimathea and many men and women that were followers of Jesus and Mary Magdalene left Jerusalem, crossed the desert, and went to Alexandria in Egypt. Imagine the scenario. This pregnant woman is with a Joseph crossing the desert. And when we see this scenario, most of the people see the mother of Jesus and her husband. So we wonder, which Mary was crossing the desert? With which Joseph was crossing the desert? What was that story also changed? Because we know that she crossed the desert. She was received in Alexandria, and there are many evidence that she was there with Joseph of Arimathea, her brother Lazarus, her sister Martha, and also the mother of John the Baptist, which was Salome, and 30 other women who were called the Marys. Mary was a title, not a name. It was a title. It was Mary Martha, Mary Salome, Mary Magdalene, and Mary, 30 women. Some of them were apostles. And in the Gnostic Gospels, they are named. Some of them are named. And it is mentioned that there were not only 12 male apostles, but also other apostles. And also there were more women apostles than men. But this was totally erased from the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And then we totally forgot this truth. So these women crossed the desert along with this Mary and this Joseph. They went to Egypt. Why Egypt? Because there they believe in the sacred feminine, divine feminine, and there were goddesses that they truly honored, so they felt safe there. But then, before I go to Egypt, I need to explain something about the importance of Mary Magdalene politically with Jesus. She was an impure Jewish, which means that she was a Jewish who believed in the feminine divinity. All the descendants of the Benjamin tribe believed and protected the feminine divinity. And she was a descendant from the Benjamin tribe. So she was considered, along with them and others, to be impure Jewish. But also she was the daughter of a very influential man, rich, powerful, the father of Lazarus, and he gave her and Lazarus and Martha an inheritance, money. She was independent financially, and that's extremely rare. But then Salome and other women from high noble stature were also independently, financially independent, just like Mary Magdalene. So even though what Laura says was true, in the high spheres of society, of Hebrew society, women could be independent. They could have their own way. So Mary Magdalene was one of them. And with that money and that power, she could empower the minister of Jesus along with other Jewish independent women. And she could, thanks to her father, she could embrace other people that were not Jewish, especially pagans. and they were called Gentiles too. And she was known as the tower that protected and embraced all those who were not pure Jewish. So it was a very good combination between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, because Jesus, as a rabbi, only had power upon the Jewish, but she had power upon many other people who were not pure Jewish. So together, they built this ministry, this powerful community that was beginning to be so powerful that the Roman Empire started to feel afraid. But not only the Roman Empire, but also the high clerical of Jewish in Judah, in Jerusalem. So they both together decided to silence this community, and they crucified Jesus. But since they were a patriarchal way of thinking, they never believed that Mary Magdalene was powerful enough to build a church. So they didn't kill her. And she could leave Jerusalem alive. She could move to another place where she was safe, and this was first Egypt. There, she gave birth. Some say before that. Anyway, she gave birth to twins, a guy, a male, and a female, 2 babies, bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Many people don't accept this, but that's the way it is. So she waited some years. She went to Italy. She talked to the emperor, the Roman Emperor Tiberius. She explained to him what happened in Jerusalem, the unfair way that Jesus was crucified. He asked her to do a miracle, and she did so. In front of him, she turned a common egg into a red egg. And that's why she is connected with color red. Mary Magdalene is usually painted with red hair or with a red cloth over her head. So she went back to Egypt. She took her babies and the whole community that was with her, and they started a very long trip to what we call South France. That was still the province of the Roman Empire. Over there, there was a community of impure Jewish, so she was safe there. In fact, she was received by the governor of the Roman Empire as the queen of the Jews, the consort of the king of the Jews, the wife of Jesus. And this couple, because he was married, asked her to do a miracle. Their baby, the baby girl, died a few days ago, and asked her to revive her. And so she did, just like Jesus did with Lazarus, her brother. And from then on, she was the most beloved woman and messenger of Jesus' ministry. With her was the apostle Philip, which one of the gospels that were found in the Nag Hammadi and not included in the Bible. He was a follower of Mary Magdalene. The apostle Philip was with her, and he continued his trip up north France to do his work, which was to spread out the message of Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea took the boy and continued his trips to Brittany, which is called right now UK, and they disappeared in Scotland. No one knows about them anymore because he was protecting this boy and taking him as far as possible. Mary Magdalene stayed in France with the daughter. Her name is Sarah, a Jewish famous name, Sarah. And she grew up there, Sarah, and she was, of course, married, and she had children, and the legacy, the bloodline continued to develop along the time. Mary Magdalene, we are going to the bloodline after, but Mary Magdalene spent years walking from one place to another, spreading the news, and the message and community she was creating was the original message of Christ or Jesus, which was one, sin doesn't mean what Christians usually understand as sin. It was just doing something that is wrong to yourself, and that you have to, in your Gnostic process, see that you are hurting yourself, and then finding lighting, inner light, and transform that sin into a miracle of connection to God inside you.
Self-awareness.
Awareness. Thank you very much. Awareness, inner awareness. Then she also taught to people that the marriage, that women were, they have the freedom of deciding by themselves about sex life, about money, about politics, about marriage. They were free of men, so they can work equally in leadership with men. And also she talked about the soul, and how the soul had to go to different stages. This is written beautifully in her gospel, but how the soul goes to different stages, 8, basically, until they get to number 9. And in number 9, they are connected to their own divinity. So these stages were a Gnostic process that people needed to be helped by others, and others who already achieved that were in the duty to help those in the process. She also talked about the leadership of women when teaching the message, because men were usually protecting or hunting or doing hard work, and women were more connected to life, to giving life. So women were in charge of giving the message over men, and not because they were superior, but because they have a more connection, direct connection with life, since we are life givers. And so women started the Church of Love. That was the church that was called the Church of Mary Magdalene. She also taught, and it was in the several of the Gospels of Nag Hammadi, the Gnostic Gospels, that God was both male and female, both father and mother, and that if men were created as image of God, women were created as image of God. So God had to be both male and female. So all those teachings and even more, they were suppressed by the new church after Peter's teachings, which means the Orthodox Church, that was well explained by Eli. And the persecutions didn't start after Constantine. They were fighting and killing each other since the beginning. They were fighting the followers of Peter and the followers of Mary Magdalene that stayed in Judah and in Israel, what we call now Israel. They were fighting each other, but in South France, they were at peace. So for years and years, this community was growing and growing and growing. The Roman Empire disappeared. They were transformed into feudos. ¿Cómo se dice feudos, Laura?
It's very similar.
Feudos.
They are
These big
huge
lands.
big land masses of
That were protected by a count or marquis, or those feudos. This so fiefs. Thank you,
Fiefdoms.
Rosario.
Fiefdoms.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Rosario.
Yeah.
So the land was divided into fiefs, and up north France, the king didn't like that because he didn't have power over these people. These fiefs were transformed in the Merovingian kings. And this mer, in French is mer, which means sea, vine, which means blood, sea, Mary Magdalene, and vine or wine, which means the blood of Jesus. The Merovingians were the kings that gathered all together, or all these fiefs, and then more wars, more everything. And at the end of the 900 after Christ, something happened. And that's they got together again, and they called themselves the Cathars. And the Cathars brought out to light openly, with authenticity, the whole message of Mary Magdalene. And women were equal to men. They spread this new religion that was Christian, but called the Cathars. And they spread so fast and so big that by the year 1200, the year 1200, the Catholic Church felt in danger. So they decided to send a crusade, like Eli mentioned, and during 20 years, they exterminated every Cathar alive.
I tried to.
This was very painful. They killed pregnant women. They killed old people. They killed children. The order that this so-called Pope was to kill, not see, just kill. No one could stay alive. And if they do that, they will be forgiven all their sins and go to paradise. So these crazy people went into this crusade. Templars were not part of it, and they
annihilated or massacred.
Annihilated everyone. Templars were also condemned, and less than 100 years after massacring the Cathars, there was the next Pope ordered to kill the Templars. And the Templars were the protectors of the sacred Grail, which was Mary Magdalene and her bloodline. So they were killed, but not all of them. Some survived in Spain, then they moved to Portugal, and after that, Inquisition reached them, killed them, and some of them just disappeared. Some say they crossed to what we call United States, and there are evidence that they were there, okay? So all of this happened in this 600 years after Christ. Inquisition took over since at the end of 1200. Inquisition was created, and they took over the Crusades and everything. And they decided that everything that had to do with Mary Magdalene and everything that had to do with women had to be considered a sin. everything. Before that, it wasn't like that. But they decided to really eradicate femininity, the divine feminine, everything that had to do with women's leadership, and just erase it. So they created what is called the Maleficum Maleficae. The Maleficum Maleficae, which is a book created by two monks that teach people how to torture, burn, kill any woman that had a free thinking, that had sex life, that had money, that whatever know about medicine or any other thing, because of the 7 demons of Mary Magdalene. And they were destroyed during 500 years non-stop. We women have been mistreated,
persecuted and killed.
Persecuted and mistreated, because those who decided to survive, they were mistreated. I remember I was once in Spain in a castle, and underground there was a museum of all the instruments that were used to torture women. When I was there, I almost vomited. It was awful. I ran away. And the guy who was trying to do something special for me, he said, but don't run, don't run. And I said, I have to get out of here. This is awful. How can you bring me here? The things that used to be done to women, they were awful. So this story is in our bloodline as much as the truth of Mary Magdalene. And it is our choice to decide which one is going to lead our heart and our soul. Which one are you going to decide is going to lead your thoughts, your actions, your words, yourself completely? The last, master of the Cathars, when he was in the fire because he was burned out, when he was in the fire, he sent a prophecy. And this prophecy said, in 700 years, the laurel will revive. And she, Notre Dame, will come out again. These 700 years happened last year. And since a bit more before that until now, there is an explosion of Mary Magdalene all over the world. People are talking about her, books are being written, we are talking about her, and we are not being persecuted. We are not being killed. We are free to talk. We are free to take over what she tried to teach to us hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It had not to do with women be superior than men. It has to be with respecting each other. It has to do with so many things that we are going to talk in the next seminar that is extremely interesting. But this prophecy is happening. Here we are, Laura, Eli, and me, and hundreds of men and women talking freely about her teachings. So to just close this sharing with you, this town where this land where she landed when she traveled from Egypt to what we call South France, nowadays is called the Three Maries, or the Three Marie de la Mer, or Sainte Marie de la Mer.
The three Marias of the
de la Mar.
or
of the sea.
of the sea.
Maria, the three Maries of the sea. Okay. And in this place, every year, the 24th of May is celebrated that she was there, that she got to South France. So thousands and thousands of people gathered there. I've been there. It's really overwhelming, really, really overwhelming. And her daughter, Sarah, it's a statue with a black face, because the black virgins and the black faces usually represent what the face that had to be hidden. So this beautiful Sarah is taken along the streets until she gets into the sea, turns around, and then comes out, and thousands and thousands of people are following this process, this walk, until she comes into her church. And in that church, even though there is a Christian Catholic priest, in the altar, it is not Christ, it is Sarah. And by her side, there is Christ and there is Mary Magdalene. And along the walls is the trip that Mary Magdalene, Sarah, and Salome had to do in a boat, until they got to South France. So it's a very peculiar kind of church. And then in Saint-Baume, there is the Groot. It's called the Groot.
A cave.
The cave where she retired and where she died. And then her body, some part of her body or skeleton are in a chapel down and Basilica of Mary Magdalene, the Basilica of Mary Magdalene. Other parts and Besley, like 2 hours south Paris, and the rest disappeared. And it is said that the Templars took the rest of her skeleton along with the skeleton of Jesus. And these are together somewhere in the world. So whatever is or is not, what we know of is Mary Magdalene has never been a prostitute. It was something that was created almost 600 years after her life. She was never a prostitute. She was a rich, powerful, well-educated woman, independent, financially independent. She was a co-leader with Jesus, and she took his message to the New World, and over there, a new church started. She was the chosen one, not Peter. Peter was a difficult man, but the Catholic Church chose Peter as the cornerstone of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And from then on, the whole story changed. So here we are right now at this moment with this new opportunity to rewrite story, to rewrite our story, and to allow ourselves to believe that we have a place before and after Christ. And I said to Eli the other day that we were talking that, who knows, maybe in 100 years or 3 centuries, people will start saying before Christ and Mary Magdalene and after Christ and Mary Magdalene, because after all, it was like that. And so my mother at the end said to me, you know, I don't need the lies to believe in him and to believe in her. I'm a Christian. I believe in his message. I don't need lies. My faith stays the same, but now I know that sex is fun.
Thank you so much, Teresa and Eli. This has been an amazing, amazing webinar, incredibly illuminating. We're just going to have time for one question. just to wrap up today and to give us the solid understanding of why you said all these amazing things, just your opinion, Eli and Tere, of why is it that, as we know, history was written by the powerful. But this truth of Mary Magdalene and Jesus, this revolutionary and beautiful, let's say, a church of love, why was it so destroyed? What were the essence that made it so more powerful than the power that we see now, that even Eli, when she talks about, she feels like so emotionally charged? And
Yeah, I can answer to that.
Yes.
First of all, because at the time the church was built, people had no education, and they needed a guidance. They needed laws. They needed what to do and what not to do. They needed to be told how to pray, how to follow something. So Judaism did that. The Hebrew did that with their own religion. So remember that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were Jewish. They were not Christians. Christians were called long after them. So this Christianity, new Christianity, the followers of Jesus, whether they were Jewish or not, they needed an establishment, an hierarchy, and structure. And the Orthodox Church, which they call themselves like that, created that structure. But also there was a political point of view that Eli is going to share. And again, the Gnostic, they were called Gnostic, and then they were called hereticals. The Gnostic or hereticals, they were totally into the inner awareness. And that process is really difficult, really, really difficult. So not everybody could really achieve that spiritual maturity. So people tend to go to, what do I have to do? Tell me, instead of, let me find by myself what I have to do. And that was one of the reasons. But the other one was that God was seen by Jesus and Mary Magdalene as a compassive being, not a punisher.
A compassionate being.
A compassionate being. Thank you very much. A compassionate being, not a punisher, not a judge, but a compassionate being. And also with both genders or no gender. And this was against what patriarchal structure needed. Now I'm, Eli, the political point of view, because you have more English than me to explain that.
I think beautifully said. I think all I would add is when you juxtapose the fruits of the Spirit that are described so beautifully in those missing pages in that vision that Jesus gave to Mary, the fruits of the Spirit being things like love and compassion, wisdom and understanding, honor and humility, on and on. Those are juxtaposed to other fruits that have to do with fear and judgment, and lack of love. And what's so powerful
Totally
is
the opposite. Totally the opposite.
Correct. But the point is that Jesus taught personal responsibility, that we can do it, and we can be in direct relationship with our higher power to actually achieve spiritual enlightenment. So imagine what that does in the face of a church or any organization that is power-based. You see it today with people like Trump, right? If they can kind of manipulate and convince the masses that they are needed, it relieves people of the responsibility of taking their
right.
future into their own hands. And so to put that Jesus was so radical, and of course Mary Magdalene and anyone who actually followed those original teachings were so radical, because it was about empowering people to do this themselves. And so it was an incredible threat to the power base of a church bureaucracy, right? They couldn't allow that to happen, because then nobody needed them.
And to any hierarchy in the political hierarchy, because they were saying to people, you're responsible for yourself. You can govern yourself. I mean, and there is equality. So how you don't have to follow what the Roman Empire is telling you to do. You are free people. Move. You are free people. And that for the Roman Empire was a no-no. And after the Roman Empire, there were other empires. It was not the only one, because men, when they are connected, and I mean men, masculine, men, when they are connected with the patriarchal way of thinking, they become the expression of war, of dictatorship, of I'm the only one who can be a king and govern. So everything that they taught was against that kind of thinking.
Well,
So,
and it gets, even, sorry. I was just
I
going
just have to
to say,
this is so fabulous, because bottom line, this religion of love of Mary Magdalene and Jesus was the first non-violent movement. It's not about Mandela and Gandhi and the women for the voting movement. Actually, that was the first one that was totally abolished and never discussed in history. So we really need to study history to understand better.
And I want to add something.
Yes.
There are people in France who like to call Marie Magdalene as the first feminist. And this is wrong. She didn't have to be a feminist. She lived in a community where they were equal. Feminism was not necessary. And this is very important. She was not in a community where she had to fight for her right. So she's not the first feminist, just for you to clear out.
Thank you. Eli, and then we'll close. Yeah.
Sure. Just maybe one last thought. Tara, you mentioned the whole idea of sin, and what the church has done with that. And I just wanted to share something. If you actually look at the original root word of sin and its original meaning, what it means to sin is to miss the mark.
Yes, to miss the mark.
It really is a beautiful relief, because we all miss the mark. But what Jesus and Mary Magdalene gave us were the tools to work toward a higher spiritual mark for ourselves. Yes. So, the church was so fear based, contrary to the specific things that Jesus, shared in that vision. And so people, I think, have been so encumbered with this notion of sin and wrongdoing and the narratives that have been passed down for generations that humans are inherently kind of bad. It's just so tragic, because if we can just think about, we miss the mark, but if we keep working toward a higher level of being, we will hit the mark, at least the high water mark of our own lives. And that is one of many, many beautiful things that they clarified. There have been so many words and ideas and concepts and beliefs that have been so corrupted that I just, feel like we could go on a campaign to relieve people of burden. But anyway, I'll stop there.
I think that patriarchy missed the mark.
Yes, it's amazing how we have evolved. And today, I think one of the most beautiful things is that there's so many movements about becoming more conscious, more self-knowledge. And we know even Socrates in Greece, many centuries ago said, know thyself. So it's something that we need to all take into consideration and do an internal journey of self-knowledge, so that we can all, the 8 or 9 billion human beings, become more conscious about our values that matter. And with that, I want to close saying that the caring economy is something that we really believe is a movement towards creating more consciousness. And our next third webinar, and I hope you can all join us and share not only this recording, the recording of the first webinar, will be on July 26th, Wednesday, at the same time, noon, and will be about Mary Magdalene and the women's leadership of today and how Mary Magdalene is seen. So on that note, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Wonderful.
Oh, you too, my dear. Much love.
Love it.
Okay, ladies, I'm so happy to be here and welcome everybody to this amazing webinar. And thank you for joining Women for Solutions. We are proud to present our 164th Women for Solution webinar, where we create awareness, connect, we talk, we learn, we inspire to action, to regenerate, to reimagine, and to make our world a better place. I'm Laura Jaduru Koch, founder of Women for Solution, a global network of thousands of women and men entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of more than 40 countries, where we share simple and effective scalable solutions towards a caring economy. Today, we have two amazing speakers, passionate about what we're going to talk about, that is Mary Magdalene, historic context, and Jesus Christ. I know this is not about religion. This is about facts, the truth of what happened more than 2,000 years ago. Both of them are dear friends and also board members of Women for Solutions. Teresa Egaña is a transformational speaker and mentor of feminine in leadership and adventure and nature lover. She's a psychologist, a professional breath worker, systematic constellation, and non-flick coach, as the three of us are, and several in the line also. She's a focus on, she started, and that's how I met her, this amazing journey for hundreds of women called Lecturas Arquetipales, where she talks and reads about these amazing books that inspire women to change, to transform. And she has dedicated many of these talks about Mary Magdalene. And our second speaker is Ellie Ingraham, CEO of Center for Partnership Solutions, founded by Riane Eisler, our very well-known Riane Eisler, who started the concept of a caring economy more than 40 years ago. Ellie was formerly CEO of Sager Family Foundation, and previously she was Taya Global Artisan, focused on alleviating poverty among African textile weavers. What most people don't know about Ellie was she's an ordained minister in life and studies sacred text and literature for more than 12 years. That's why she is the deal like Tere about this. So we are going to be, this is the first in a series of 3 webinars about the historic context of Mary Magdalene, what happened then, and the impact that Mary Magdalene had during her life and today, up to today, for 2,000 years later. So on that note, please, ladies, take the stand.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone, for taking some time out of your day to join us. What started as a conversation, a spontaneous conversation with the 3 of us, really sort of resulted in this. We realized a common love and interest and curiosity around Mary Magdalene and thought we might have a broader conversation. And so thank you for joining us. I thought it was personally really important before we got into Mary Magdalene, the person, the Gospel of Mary, and her relationship with Jesus, was to give you a historic context that I think really leads up to why they were where they were, who they were, what they believed, why they lived where they lived. And so that's what I'm going to try to do, is to cover about 3,000 years of humanity in about 15 minutes. It's a little bit daunting, but heck, let's go for it. So the fight for the soul of humanity has been fought on the battleground of religion and spirituality. The war particularly has been between patriarchal monotheism and partnership-based polytheism. Polytheism is what embraced the feminine, the equally divine, equally powerful, equally engaged feminine. And so before we can talk about Mary Magdalene as one of the co-founders of the Christian movement with Jesus, or Yeshua as he was known back then, I think we first have to look at the historical context of the Israelites, or the Jews. Back then, religion, spirituality, and politics, even more than today, were completely intertwined, and they were extremely fluid because old world cultures collided. They shared, they took from one another, they fought over things. But what happened was the narratives that were passed down to us, like most of history, reflect really the stories of the winners, the ones who prevailed, the ones who dominated. And that's what we really have to kind of keep in mind, particularly as new evidence kind of emerges. We have to remember that back then, there was no written canon at the time. There was no one set of definitive beliefs. And the practice of oral tradition, you can imagine what kind of game of telephone probably played out with that over thousands of years. And even when things were written down, it's very clear. First of all, they were written centuries after the events happened. And then in looking at the writings and comparing them, it's quite clear that documents were modified, they were redacted, they were appended. And so it's kind of hard to know, what really was. And so that kind of gives a backdrop. It's actually any wonder any of them survived today, and we'll sort of touch on the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Nag Hammadi library, which were incredibly important discoveries because of how they held the sacred feminine. So just to give you a super macro oversimplified history of humanity, go back 3,000 years, polytheism was alive and well, from the cave dwellers where we have pictures on walls, down through the Egyptian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, all of which were extant with the time of the Jews. Polytheism was the religion of the day. Fast forward 1,000 years to around 2000 BCE, and I just want to make sure BCE is used to refer to before our common era. CE is used to refer to common era. Bible scholars no longer use BC and AD, so you'll hear me refer to BCE or CE. Just want to clarify that. So fast forward to 2000 BCE, henotheism was introduced. Henotheism said, okay, we acknowledge that there are multiple gods, but we're going to choose to only believe in one. So it was sort of this interim step. Fast forward another 1,000 years to 1000 BCE, monotheism was really almost forced upon people, and we'll get into why. So it went from polytheism to a sort of a hybrid model, henotheism to monotheism. Really completely oversimplified human history. So let's start with Abraham. Abraham is probably a name you're familiar with. He lived around 2000 BCE. He is considered, interestingly, not only the father of Judaism, he's considered the father of Christianity and Islam. A lot of people don't really think of him that way. And apparently he was called by God, known as Yahweh back then, anglicized. It translates as Jehovah, a name we sometimes hear today. And he was called to lead his people, who were undefined at that time, into the land of Canaan. So you have Abraham and his descendants going to the land of Canaan, which was the promised land. Interestingly enough, the land of Canaan was a polytheistic community.
Who were their gods? The male god El and the female god Asherah. El, which became a word associated sort of as God, we hear even today in songs like the first Noel or Emmanuel, or names like mine, Elizabeth or Elijah. El is God. So the Abraham and his descendants lived in the land of Canaan for hundreds of years, immersed in polytheism. They lived there until there was a famine, and then they left and went to Egypt. Sadly, they became enslaved in Egypt. We'll get to that in a minute. But before they left Canaan on their way out to Egypt, apparently an angel appeared to the son of Abraham. He had a son, Jacob, and an angel appeared to him and changed his name to Israel. Jacob, or Israel, had 12 sons. These 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. Hence, where we get the Israelites. They are really the descendants of Abraham. They now have a recognized identity. They have 12 tribes. They get enslaved in Egypt. Fast forward 500 years, Moses, called by Yahweh, to deliver the Israelites from slavery under the Egyptian Empire. Well, guess what? The Egyptian Empire, where they were enslaved for over 400 years, was polytheistic. So there was mixing and matching, believe me, of religion and spirituality at that time. 500 years forward is Solomon. Solomon, again, all these dudes were called by Jehovah or by Yahweh to do things on behalf of his people. I'm just reporting what it's written. I'm not saying it's the truth, okay? So Solomon was called to govern the Israelites. And as their governor, he built in the year 1000 the magnificent Temple of Solomon, the first Jewish temple. It was up on the Temple Mount. It was apparently a magnificent structure. It had an inner chamber called the Holy of Holies, where just the high priest could convene with the god or gods. It had a courtyard where apparently men could be, and an outer courtyard where only women could be. You can have your thoughts on that. But anyway, what was interesting was Solomon had many wives, many foreign wives, and so he was very much influenced by the things they believed in, and was very comfortable with a polytheistic practice at this temple of the Jews. He also housed there the Ark of the Covenant, something you've probably all heard of. And in the Ark were the 2 tablets handed to Moses, the rod of Aaron. Aaron was Moses' brother, and a jar of manna, which is what the Jews lived on when they were wandering in the wilderness for 4 years. What's interesting, though, is I always wondered, why was Aaron's rod included in there? Now, Moses apparently wasn't a good spokesman, and Aaron often spoke for him. And apparently, while Moses was up on Mount Sinai getting the tablets from God, what was Aaron doing? Aaron was down at the bottom of the mountain building the golden calf and singing and dancing around it in a polytheistic practice with all the other Jews that were there waiting for Moses. But Aaron's rod gets put in the Ark of the Covenant. So interesting. Let's see, what else? So there's clear evidence that there were 2 deities primarily worshipped at the Temple of Solomon. One was Yahweh, which comes from the Jewish male god. And then who else? Oh my gosh, was Asherah, the Canaanite pagan considered goddess female. These were the 2 primary deities that were being worshipped at Solomon's temple. And in fact, Asherah is specifically mentioned in the book of Kings, which is part of the Hebrew scriptures of the Old Testament. They've also found numerous pottery shards going back to the 8th century that have specific inscriptions on them, asking for blessings from Yahweh and his Asherah, his meaning like his consort. So it was very accepted back then. Asherah was known as the goddess of heaven. The name Asherah means to be sacred or to sanctify. And Asherah was associated with the Holy Spirit, embodying the Holy Spirit. And in fact, when you look at the words used for spirit in Hebrew, it's ruach, is feminine. In Aramaic, the other language that Jesus and Mary and others spoke at the time, is ruach, also feminine. And when it evolved to Greek, the word pneuma, where we get pneumonia because it has to do with breath or spirit, the word is neutral. The point being that in nowhere in there was it ever male. It was always very feminine. Asherah was also associated with divine wisdom. She was associated with the tree of life, which becomes important when we think of how the narrative got changed. And here's the clincher. She was also associated with the serpent. The serpent at the time when they were worshiping was the symbol of fertility. It was a symbol of creative life force. It was a symbol of transformation in the way a snake sheds its skin and is kind of renewed. And it was a symbol of healing. And you see down to our day with medical symbols, there's a snake often in there. So it was alive and well in the Solomon's Temple. If we fast forward 300 years to the year 722, this is when the Assyrian Empire was alive and well. And the Assyrians, again, were polytheistic, but they came and they destroyed 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. So a huge portion of the Jews were either destroyed or they were dispersed. And they were dispersed within the Assyrian Empire, polytheistic, or elsewhere out of it. There were two remaining tribes that survived. It was the tribe of Benjamin, which Mary Magdalene is thought to be descended from. And then there was the tribe of Judah, and that is the direct line of Jesus and his direct lineage to the son of Judah, or the tribe of Judah, is in the Bible in both Matthew and Luke. And in Matthew, his direct lineage is of Joseph. And in Luke, the direct lineage is through his mother, Mary. And you can see how he is name by name connected all the way back. Well, these two tribes become very significant. The kingdom of Judah is where they settled in Judea in the 6th century. And that is from Judea that the name Judaism comes and the name Jew comes from. It is from a geographic location. All right, so then things were going well at Solomon's Temple, but there's been, this disbursement of Jews. And then in 621 BCE, something very cataclysmic happened, a complete cultural wipeout. And it was when a group of priests, a minority group of priests known as the Deuteronomists, took control of the temple, and they wiped out anything to do with Asherah, anything to do with the feminine, the altars, the shamanic practices. They were considered shaman at the time, and any notion, idols, figurines, altars, anything, gotten rid of. They instituted this idea that any kind of false idol was bad, and those false idols were mostly feminine. So all feminine symbols removed, massive cultural destruction by the end of the 7th century BCE. And these Deuteronomists, when we talk about the winners get the narrative, the Deuteronomists, were credited with many of the Hebrew prophets and wrote a number of the books in the canon. You probably recall the book of Deuteronomy, but also Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings were all written by these Deuteronomists. So after that big wipeout, then there was another one. Now the Babylonians were the empire, and they were also polytheistic. And so they ruled over the Jews, but they ended up being the ones to actually destroy the temple that had already been kind of compromised by the Deuteronomists. So now there was really no place of central worship, no place of seeing and interacting with the divine feminine. And as a result of all of these empires kind of crushing the Jews and the Deuteronomists, the connection to the divine feminine was lost. The priests actually demoted Asherah from being the heavenly goddess to being the human Eve, and she went from mother goddess to mother of humanity. Eve then got conflated with the whole myth of the fall of humanity. You get introduced the tree and the serpent. Remember, those were symbols that Asherah had around her. So you can see how that whole narrative in Genesis kind of got all mixed up with that. And it was at this time, it is thought, that this systemic persecution and exclusion of women began. Anyone who expressed an interest in the divine feminine was burned or stoned. And so all connection to the sacred on earth really got lost. The only kind of remnant we have today is this idea of Mother Nature. And so here we are 2,500 years later, still fighting to kind of restore the feminine. So I'm about ready to hand it over to Tara. I just want to sort of set you up now after all of that stuff went on. Some of the dispersed Jews quietly settled near the Dead Sea, and they really kept quiet because of all the persecution. They became what were known as the Essenes, Essenes. They were one of three major Jewish sects. There were the Essenes, there were the Pharisees, and there were the Sadducees. But the Essenes were very different from the other two groups. They were far more fluid in their thinking. And it wasn't until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947 and 1946 in 11 caves that it really became clear that the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually the library of the Essene Jews. And the Dead Sea Scrolls were part of every book of the Hebrew Bible, except for the book of Esther. But these Essenes lived for thousands of generations, and they were connected actually to the Jains of India, who have very similar beliefs, another whole story. But they believed in ritual purity. They believed in asceticism, poverty, peace to the extent where they didn't even like to get angry, communality, they always ate and prayed together. And what became kind of interesting, they valued keeping secrets. And because of that value, that is why we have what we have today, which we're going to talk about mostly in the next webinar. And the other thing they did, which I thought was kind of charming, was they thought it was really important to always keep track of the names of the angels. And so they have written all their names in a lot of their writings. But guess who was Essene? Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and John the Baptizer were all from the Essene community. It's why they knew each other. And so the Essenes taught of an inner spiritual path with a direct relationship to God as the way towards spiritual enlightenment. They did not teach patriarchy. They did not teach a church orthodoxy or hierarchy. Women were equal teachers and leaders based on their spiritual qualifications. They were singularly different among the Jews at this time. And their teachings found their way mostly into what we call now the Gnostic texts, even in the Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism, and in a group known as the alchemists, where the whole idea of Sophia and divine wisdom got introduced. And oh, guess who they talk about? The alchemists refer to Mary the Jewish. Gosh, I wonder who that is. So very, very interesting. All right, so I'm about to stop. I'm just going to say that the Essenes did not align at all with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were the ones who were kind of behind the Deuteronomists, who were all about monotheism, strict patriarchal teachings and organizations. And they are described extensively in the Bible as the ones who sought to get rid of Jesus, his teachings, and his disciples. I'm going to stop there. Over to you, Teddy.
Thank you, Ellie. We are really excited because that was such an amazing and broad description of what was going on at that time. And so on that note, Maria Teresa Egaña, please give us your passion about what you've taught to many hundreds of women. You're muted.
I'm so delighted with Ellie sharing. My God, really, really, I'm honoring your voice, your knowledge, and the fluency with you share your knowledge. Thank you very much. First of all, my English is very limited, so I'm going to speak very slowly so I can pronounce the best I can. Let's see. Taking from what Eli was sharing, let's make a trip to this place that is called Galilee or Israel or Judah. This place where the 27 years before Jesus was born, the Roman Empire came and took possession of those communities and took possession of the tradings, of the society, of laws and everything. So all these Jewish communities and were not only mixed with pagans and with what Eli called the Asans, who were also known as impure Jewish. But also came the way of thinking of the Romans, which were patriarchal society and a political way of conducting power. And they were not even a little bit pro-women. So in this area, in this moment of history, Jesus was born and Mary Magdalene too. And they were born in a place where, for example, pagans were very powerful because they were making tradings from Egypt to Israel, and they were bringing culture from Egypt and also from Greek. And this one of the main herencias, Laura?
Heritage.
Heritage that they brought was Artemis. And Artemis became the heiress of Asherah. Artemis became the one who took the place of Asherah in the minds and the psyche of these pagans and also of the impure Jewish or the Assyrians. And this Artemis was a goddess, very powerful, very beautiful. She was the protector of the traders, of every commerce, the fishermen, and all the people who were migrating from one place to another. So it means that Yahweh, the Jewish God, and Artemis were the main one in the divinity concept of all the people who were sharing this community or this life. God, this is the first time I'm speaking about this in English, so I'm finding the words.
You're doing an amazing job.
Oh, thank you very much. So Mary Magdalene was born in a family that has been truly not misunderstood, but was misled along the history. She was born as a family made with Lazarus and Martha. The three of them were sister and brothers, and they had a father that was a very prominent, very important religious man in the Judah, in the Hebrew community, but also as an impure, as an impure Jewish. He was a believer of Artemis. So Mary Magdalene was educated under that conception. She was also an extremely, extremely intelligent woman. and Jewish families who belonged to a high standard, high profile families with had money and position and power. Women had certain privileges that usually were not in the common possession of other women. So she was a well-educated woman who spoke several languages, who knew about history, geography, mathematics. She knew about many, many things, and she was well known in her community. She was also a woman who inherited money from his father. When her father died, this was also a privilege that was not common for women, but for privileged women. She was in possession of her own financial independence, as well as Martha and Lazarus. So she became a leader herself before knowing Jesus. She was a well-known woman before knowing Jesus. She has never been a prostitute. No, it doesn't matter how many times Christianity history says so. It was not only, and I'm going to jump to 500 years after Jesus and Mary Magdalene, it was not only until 500 years after them that she was named by prostitute by the Pope Gregory the Magnus. Before that, she was never, ever considered a prostitute. So if you see Netflix, please, Netflix is not the new Bible. Please do not believe in Netflix. Believe in history, okay? So we see this woman who was beautiful, young, very powerful, independent, educated, a privileged woman. And she meets this young guy who was a rabbi, also extremely intelligent and very well respected in the Jewish community. He was also a rebellious rabbi. He didn't follow everything that he was ordered to do so. But he offered this community of not only Jewish and impure Jewish, but also pagans, that he offered a new way of conceiving God, a God that had no gender or that had both gender, father and mother. He went back to the origins of Hebrewism, and he went back to the origin of divinity. He brought back divinity. And inherited, he was a descendant of Solomon. Mary Magdalene was a descendant of a royal family, also from the Hebrew community. And they both connected, and they both became a pair of leaders who show a new way of understanding, but also a compassionate, loving God. They never pretended to create another religion. Christianity existed long before Jesus was dead or crucified. Long after Jesus was crucified. At that time, they never pretended to create another religion. So we must understand this, because that means that they were revolutionaries of whatever was existing already. Also, they were talking, and I pay attention, I always talking about both of them, not only Jesus, but both of them. They were talking about a different way of understanding power, politics. They were talking about women's rights. They were talking about leadership in women, in religion, in politics, in society as well. And this was considered a revolutionary, an aggression to the Roman Empire, and also to the patriarchs of Judaism. So both of them became a threat to this whole community. Mary Magdalene was a woman that was the head of about 30 other women. Between them, there were several women apostles or apostles who were women. And few people know that there were not only men apostles, but also women who were apostles. But, and we talk about that, Inquisition erased that truth and only left alive the male apostles. But there were, like Salome, John Baptist's mother, and other women, they were apostles. So Mary Magdalene was not the only one, but she was the leader of all of them. And how do we know this? There, Eli mentioned the Nag Hammadi manuscripts and Gospels, and also the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there are other manuscripts that have been found since 1945 to today. We still are discovering manuscripts that are telling us another story of Mary Magdalene, Jesus, and that moment of history. These manuscripts were prohibited and considered heretical 300 years after Jesus was crucified by Constantine and the first council of Nicaea. And these manuscripts were hidden since then. So you heard when Eli mentioned that the manuscripts that we know of the Old Testaments were intervened, were changed, were written by a group of scribans that were serving a political, patriarchal way of understanding religion and society and politics. But these manuscripts that were written the first and the second century after Jesus' crucifixion, they have never been touched. They have never been changed. They have never been intervened. So there are the first and only manuscripts that are saying a different kind of history that is not serving any politic or any religion after Jesus' crucifixion and after Mary Magdalene move on to another territory, seeking for her safety. So going back to this wonderful couple, we understand that Mary Magdalene is a woman who has a leadership by herself, and that she connected with Jesus, and she creates along with him a new way of understanding women, men, society, and politics. But we all know that he was crucified, and what usually people don't know is that Mary Magdalene had a life of enormous leadership after Jesus was crucified. She was along with other apostles like Peter and James. James was Jesus' brother. And Santiago, I don't know the name Santiago in English, but they were the main apostles that talk about Jesus' message. But Mary Magdalene went along with her brother and sister and about 40 other people, and moved to Egypt and then to what we know now as South France. And over there, they created another church that was 1,000 years later destroyed by the Christian Crusades and the Catholic Inquisition. So people don't know that she was the carrier of the true message of Jesus. So whenever you start reading books like the Gnostic Gospels or the Lost Gospels or the Gospel of Thomas or Mary Magdalene or Philip, then you will see that the message that Jesus and Mary Magdalene give to the world is totally different than the one that we have heard until now. But all this story has been changed over and over again through different moments, beginning with Constantine, who was the emperor at the year 3300 after Jesus' crucifixion. And he wanted to transform, to unify the whole Roman Empire. And he did so by calling the patriarchs of the different movement of Christianity. We have to understand that by that time, there were different movements that were trying to understand the message of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And they had lots of discussions between them. There were the Valentines, there were the Arians, and they were all called, years after Jesus, they were called the Gnostic, because they, as Eli mentioned, they believe in God inside each one of us. And they say that the message of Jesus was that every one of us is son, daughter of God. He was not, and he never considered himself the only son of God, nor the divinity in this earth. He always taught, as well as Mary Magdalene, that we were all equal and we were all in the same place under the eyes of God. So they didn't believe in that hierarchy of having popes and main priests and women cannot do this or that. They believe of that equality. Some women nowadays call them that the first feminist movement, but it's not so. They were never talking about feminism. They were talking about equal right to divinity and to dignity as human beings, that was no difference between one another. So in the councils, Constantine agreed to name Christianity as the main religion, which will stop the killing and the persecution of Christians, and will consider Christianity the main religion of his empire. His mother was a very, very passionate Christian. That's why he chose Christianity. But he never was a Christian. He was baptized few hours before he died. And as a pagan, he was a follower of the sun god. And he asked the patriarchal two things. One, that this new religion had to be a representation, a masquerade of the sun god. And two, that they had to choose between them which movement of Christianity was the winner and was the main representation of the whole movements of Christianity. And the Orthodox Christianity won, and they arranged to kill and make disappear all the other patriarchals, or not patriarchal, head of the other Christians. So that was when it was ordered to destroy all the manuscripts that belonged to Gnosticism, and they were called hereticals. The first time that they were called hereticals. So years of persecution happened until around 500 after Jesus' crucifixion. They disappeared completely. They totally disappeared, and only Orthodox Christianity survived. which means that the Catholic, Roman Christianity and the Orthodox Greek Christianity were the main ones. By the year 1000 after Jesus, a new community rose in South France. They were focused on rescuing the original message of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. They were followers of Mary Magdalene, and they created this church that is called the Church of Love, and they accused the Pope, the Catholic Pope, to be corrupt, to be a thief, and to be a liar. So these people, this church in South France, they welcome people from many religions, from many kind of beliefs, from different pasts, no judgment, as long as they learn to co-live in peace. So they became a place where people was safe. And this was against what Catholic wanted to happen. So by the year 1200 something, the Pope Benedict, the Pope, and the King of France, who was in North France, they made an alliance, and they decided to erase from the earth this church that was called the Cathars. And this happened. It took about almost 200 years to do so, but they did it. And from then on, what the Gregory the Magnus in the year 500 after Christ said about Mary Magdalene being a prostitute, they took that declaration and they made it somehow like a law. And they forced every priest and every Christian follower to repeat that until it became part of the belief in Catholic or Orthodox communities. So Mary Magdalene was not only erased, but she was transformed into a woman that is a prostitute. Here I'm going to make my words. I have no idea why becoming a prostitute is such a bad thing, because prostitutes have their own rights to live and to transform their life into a beautiful, wonderful way of being a woman. And, you know, but it has always been something that sexuality and has been taken away from women. So all of this became what we usually hear at the table, in the movies, in the books, in the way we speak about Mary Magdalene. And that's the way that we understand life. It's the way that women have been seen for years. Remember that Inquisition for almost 800 years persecuted, killed, and tortured women who were sexually free or were with wise women connected with freedom or independence or seeking their own independence, their own words, their own voice. They killed women who were connected with medicine, with ritual for self-transformation. So it was almost 800 years of persecution. So after, let's say 100, at the end of 1800s, feminism start waking up and changing all these teachings and this mindset. And even though it's been over 100 years since that movement began to express about women in a different way, we still are carrying in our blood, in our mind, in our way of thinking, this wrong way of understanding history. So I'm going to stop here because next time we are going to talk about the life of Mary Magdalene after crucifixion. And we are going to understand a bit more what that means. And Laura, I give you the word, and I'm very, very, very
Grateful.
grateful for your patience with my English.
You were amazing. Your English was impeccable. And Eli, your presentation was fantastic. We have a few more minutes for questions on the incredible presentation that Eli and Tere did. If there is anything you want to ask, please go ahead. If not, I will ask the first question to both of you. How did you become so passionate about this topic? Who introduced you, and how did you weave in this knowledge into your professional and career to transform women around the world?
Eli, you want to be the first?
If I have to. Anyone who knows me knows that I am not, I don't work in a straight line. I kind of have an insatiable curiosity, but I will say, and I don't talk about this very much, from the time I was a really small girl, I had a very deep spiritual interest. I literally started reading the Bible when I was 5. My grandmother was a Christian Scientist, and she was really deeply spiritual. And while Christian Science kind of scared me when she would take me to their services, she kind of inculcated in me just a really deep respect for the exploration of sacred texts. And so when I met a Bible scholar as a teenager and started studying with them, it just opened up a whole new world. And I will say that, like all of us, I think we kind of want to know answers. Why are we here? How did we get here? Where are we going? What happens when you die? What's our purpose? All of that. And I live with those questions every day. But as I said earlier, I've really, first of all, the more I learn, the more I know I have to unlearn all the other stuff I learned. It's just this wild process of unlearning, and I like to call it re-wisdoming of my kind of inner spirit and mind. I love the fact that in the original teachings of Jesus and Mary that we're going to get into next time, they really elevate the idea of the mind as being very closely associated with the spirit. And that just really, really resonates with me. There is something that feels so truthful about these gospels and teachings that we're going to get into, in a way that I was intrigued by the other teachings, the Hebrew scriptures, the Greek scriptures, other sacred texts, but there was always something missing. Something was not right. And the thing that wasn't right was not only the absence of the feminine, but the way the feminine was treated, the way women were treated. I could never, ever sound that down and accept it. And so I am so excited that these texts have been recovered and found and are coming into the light of day. So anyway, that's why I'm here, and I'm all kind of excited again in my life around this topic. Over to you, Tere.
Well, I grew up in a Catholic family, Catholic country, Catholic school. And I never felt connected with those teachings. But I remember when I was 15, I was very mala conducta.
Very bad behaved, very bad.
Very bad behaved in school. And
You were a rebel.
Yes, and they usually asked me to leave the classroom. They were saying out. And when one of those days, I went into the chapel, and I found the Bible, and I started reading, and I found information like Jesus had brothers and sisters, and I said, but his mother is supposed to be a virgin. How come he had lots of brothers and sisters? And then start seeking and seeking. And I found out there was another story. So after I was asked forever to leave the school, not the classroom, but the school, I felt free to investigate. And when I went to school, to university, I was investigating different kind of books. It was very difficult at that time to find information. Everything was like hidden. And so I talked to priestess that were rebellious too. I talked to rabbis. I talked to ex-priests and ex-rabbis who were, by their freedom, they could talk to me about tell me about many information it wasn't found in books. And I started growing this passion about Mary Magdalene. And I felt very much connected to her. So for many, many, many years, I have been tracking books and information, and archaeologists, historians, people from Harvard University like Elaine Pagels or Karen King, people like Hakobovich, Hinka Hakobovich. I mean, there are many people who are investigating in a very, very deep way, and I'm part of this new movement in history. So for me, it has always been in me to get to know not only Mary Magdalene, but women, how women has been erased from history. Because when I found out the other story of Mary Magdalene, I started to understand that we women have another story that hasn't been told in history. So I became a passionate investigator or researcher of this other story, and that's what my life has become of. That's why I'm totally connected and focused on reveal this other story. And that's about it. That's about it.
Thank you. And we are about to close this webinar, but I have to thank you, especially the two of you, because you have inspired me. And my first knowledge as a Catholic from Argentina on all this came when I read the popular book, Da Vinci Code of Dan Brown. And I always thought this is incredible. And then I read The Name of the Rose, another book by Umberto Eco that mentioned that. And suddenly I started to investigate and read. But the key thing here is that the joy that gives me of being able to share this knowledge with so many people is that there is an incredible light of growth for every woman and man to understand that for 2,000 years, the rules of the game were power and oppression, mostly of women. And now with the teaching of the religion of love of Mary Magdalene, one can see that there's a lot of relationships between what they taught, what the Buddhists say, and other religions, like Eli said, the India Hindu religions. So on that note, I want to thank you, and I do hope you can come to our next webinar that is on the last Wednesday at the same time of June, and it's June 27th, and the title is Ministry of Mary Magdalene After the Crucifixion. And remember, Mary Magdalene is the one that has been named the most times in the Bible. And why was it she called a prostitute? There will be a lot of that information. Yes. What happened? Mm-hmm. And if both of you want to give a little glimpse of what's going to happen the next webinar, would be great. And then we'll close for the next week.
Well, first, we have people here who are writing beautiful things. Thank you, Nancy and Giovanna and Caroline. and Daniela and Sonia Patricia and Giovanna. Yes, there is a connection between Jesus and Mary Magdalene's teachings with certain other teachings from the Far East. I don't know about Japan, but yes, from other cultures, yes, for sure. Now, next month, we're going to be talking about the importance of understanding that reading the manuscripts and the Gospels is not literally. We have to understand their teachings in a different way. There are messages that are hidden, that are like behind the words that we read, and that's how that is what made crucial that Mary Magdalene message has to be understood in the right way, as well as Jesus' message, because it was the same. And we're going to be talking about her journey through the desert, Egypt, and then the sea, until she got to the Gallia, which is today South France. It was the province of the Roman Empire. And over there, she made a life that is extremely important and that some people don't know. We're also going to be talking about the children she was carrying in her womb, and what happened to them. And also we will be talking about how her leadership is influencing our mindset today.
And I'm going to further whet your appetite by saying that there have only been 3 codex manuscripts discovered, all written around the 2nd century, that are the Gospel of Mary. They're all fragments, and all 3 are missing the same pages.
Right.
Might
Right.
be kind of interesting. Further, however, another manuscript has been discovered called the Gospel of the Beloved Companion. And for the first time, we are able to see what those missing pages say and why they mysteriously were taken out of the other things that were discovered. It is
Right.
fascinating. So hopefully you'll join us. We're going to break it all down and get really into it. I'm really excited because it is mind-blowing what's contained in this complete manuscript of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene.
Right. It's wonderful. Wonderful.
There you go. Join us next time.
It's mind blowing, and it's a change, a complete change of our hearts. We will start understanding women in a complete different way. And that's so important for our leadership today. So thank you, Laura, for creating this space. And Eli, I'm so, I have become a fan of yours.
Likewise. You know I love you.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you all for participating. This has been so fantastic. I'm looking forward to see you next month. And all the information, the recording of this webinar, if you want to revise it and re-listen to it or send it to a friend, will be on our website, womenforsolutions.com. On that note, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody.